All right, we continue looking at Confucianism, and as we do so, we need to remember that Confucianism was really a philosophy of life that was built around the idea that as the leaders go, so goes the country. Now, that leader symbol was not just government, it was a leadership in terms of all of life. In every relationship, there is a dominant. There's a person who's in charge or who has more power. What Confucius believed was that if you could train the government folks to lead with proper actions and proper attitudes, if you could train the rulers, then you could develop chunzus or mature men. These were the opposite of petty and small-minded men. These were men with patience and consideration, deference, and respect. And if you could train them, then all of the other relationships that you see in society would see the ideal leadership being modeled in government, and they would apply those same aspects to their particular roles of leadership. So another way of looking at it would be to say that if everybody is driving by the same playbook or driving by the same driver's manual, as you see listed here on this screen, then all the signals and all the signs mean the same thing. Red means stop, yellow means caution or slow down, green means go at a stoplight. But what happens if everybody decides that they don't want to drive by this playbook or driver's manual? What happens then if everybody is a king unto himself? Then it's very easy to end up with this, with gridlock. And this is what Confucius was seeing in his society. He had been raised in a very feudalistic society in which everyone had a place and everyone knew what was expected of them, and everyone did their best to fulfill the responsibilities of that place. In this way, it was not a whole lot unlike Hinduism and the caste system. But what had happened was that this feudal system had begun to break down. Warlords had emerged in the power vacuum, and society was coming apart at the seams, much like this picture of gridlock. So, whereas Confucianism was very much a religion of the aristocracy, Taoism was very much a religion of the masses. They didn't pay as much attention to this leadership principle that Confucius demonstrated. Well, what Confucius said was that there were 5 basic relationships. If you take all of human life and you look at the 5, the various relationships that people have, you can boil it down to 5 basic relationships. And they are between state and citizen, between father and son. You could say this is between parents and children, between husband and wife, between elder brother and younger brother. You could say this also applies in a work situation where someone has seniority and someone is a new person, and between friends. Notice that at the bottom of this screen, notice that each one of these had responsibility. And if you look at this screen, you'll see that both of them seem to have responsibility. And if everybody understood what those responsibilities were and they decided to live out those responsibilities, then much of the ills, much of the problems with society would be resolved. Everyone has a place. Everyone has a responsibility. These are the 5 relationships that we're going to be looking at in detail in just a moment. But you can see that each one of these has a particular responsibility. If either one functions without the other, then the machine won't work. The relationships won't work. If either one is denied or is not used or is used abusively, then the system won't work. But you can see how each one of these relationships contributed to a healthy society. So let's look at relationship number 1, father to son or parent to child. The person who has the most responsibility in this is the parent. Reminds me a little bit of that old saying that a lot of parents have sore tongues, meaning that there are many cases where they have been in discussions which devolved into arguments with their children. And they heard an attitude, or the discussion started going in a direction in which it could have been very argumentative, and it escalated. And those parents with sore tongues are the ones who reminded themselves, I am the parent, they are the child. And though I can play this game and slice and dice them verbally, I choose not to do that. So the primary responsibility here is for the parent, the father or mother, to act with kindness toward the child, and the child to act with filial piety toward the parent. We don't use that idea of piety very much, but the way they might have looked at it would have been, it is the child's responsibility to do what the parent says, because the parent, the assumption is doing what is best for the family and the child. And that means that when the parent is older, then they will make sure that these parents are taken care of. When they die, they make sure that they have the proper burial rituals, and that they will continue to speak their name and remember them, and make yearly visits to their gravesites. Second, elder brother to younger brother, gentility and humility. Some of us have brothers and sisters, older or younger, and we know that gentility isn't always the easiest thing for an older brother or sister to have, especially when the little brother or sister is just bugging the bejeebers out of them. But they are older, and they're expected to be more mature. They're expected to help the parents care for the younger siblings. And so it is their responsibility to care for those younger siblings and to help the parents in this respect. In some contexts, this would mean that an older brother or sister might very well put off their own desires for education or travel in order to see that a younger brother or sister gets an education or an opportunity to travel. And likewise, the younger brother or sister is asked to have humility. Not always something easy for a younger brother or sister to have, but there's nothing that gets under an older brother or sister's skin than to have that younger brother or sister acting like a little bratty brother or sister. Husband to wife, righteous behavior and obedience. This is the one that oftentimes gets a lot of people upset, because it's not so much the righteous behavior as it is the obedience. But remember that in this context, it's not speaking so much of equality under the law or equality in value, but it's speaking about who has primary responsibility. The person who has primary responsibility in this relationship is the husband. It is his responsibility to do what is right for the wife, for the family, for their relationship. That means that he may very well not take a job that is out of town if it wouldn't be best for the family, or if it wouldn't be best for the wife. Sometimes in some Asian cultures, this may work itself out so that the husband may be working long hours. I spent a year in Japan teaching conversational English, and many of the students, the youngsters that were there, the teenagers, were there brought by their mothers. Their fathers were busy working 12 and 15-hour days to make a living and to support the family. But the idea here is that there is righteous behavior. The husband is not abusing this leadership role, but rather is using it to serve the wife and the children. And the wife, obedience. Yes, in some cultures it does mean doing what the husband says. But in In some cultures, it can also mean, particularly American culture, it can mean that a person or couple living out this particular lifestyle, the wife is willing to go or do where the husband leads, simply because he has invested and she trusts him. He has invested long hours in showing that he's not going to make any rash decisions. He's not going to just jump to conclusions. He's not going to do something that will not be helpful to the family. Fourth one is elder to younger, friend to friend. This asks for consideration and deference. One of the illustrations that I think exemplifies this is, let's say that you work at a particular place and you've been there for a couple of years. You know the routine, you know a lot of the people, you know a lot of the customers. And then in comes a new employee, and that employee, rather than giving you any amount of deference, begins to, perhaps out of their insecurity, begin to treat you as if you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. That's not very likely to get consideration from the long-term employee who has a seniority. So again, the primary responsibility is with the older employee, that they are to be considerate and of this younger employee or this younger friend, this younger neighbor, person who hasn't lived in the neighborhood as long, and that younger person is to have a spirit of deference. And finally, ruler to subject. Again, Confucianism is built around the idea that as the leaders go, so go the family, and so goes the village, so goes the region. And if you train a good leader, then you're likely to have that trickle down change coming about in society. And so that leader is to lead with benevolence. Taxes must be collected. That's the only way that governments can function, but those taxes are not to be absurd. They're not to be punitive. They're not to be used just for the padding of the government's coffers so that some of those officials can live in luxury while those who have been taxed are living in poverty. And at the same time, those who are being taxed are asked to be loyal to those in government over them, that they might pay their taxes on time. They will not say, well, the government already has enough, I'm not even going to bother to pay. Because if everybody did that, nobody would have any money whatsoever.